by Mr. Joyce.
Let us pray. Father, we thank you again for the time we can gather together and just talk about this baseball stadium. I pray that you give us wisdom. I pray that you give us understanding. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Good evening to everybody. Thank you to everybody who's out there and everybody who's watching at home. We do have the approval of the minutes as the first up on our agenda. Is there any changes that need to be made? If not, I'll
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to point out one change from
Yes,
the copy that was emailed to everybody, and that's regarding the motion on outside counsel. We had incorrectly listed the people who made the motion and second, and that has been corrected. So if there are no other changes, then
did we get in the minutes, did we get the name of Mr. Sevilla's appointment? Because I still had a blank on there.
yeah, it's in there now.
Yes, it is listed. Okay. Any other changes? If not, is there a motion?
Move to approve the minutes as corrected.
Second.
Motion to approve in a second. Any discussion? Seeing none. Everybody in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
There's no electronic voting
I know,
because
sorry,
it's set
it's-
up for the 7 members, and we have 9 members on this committee. So all votes will need to be either voice or raising of the hand.
Yes, sorry, just a habit. Now it brings us along to further discussion. Part of your packet, I did ask the staff to send out. We had, at the board level, started earlier this year a plan for a Route 1 revitalization. This was then moved down to the Economic Development and Tourism Subcommittee, which is moving this along with another subcommittee to make sure that this moves forward, to identify what should be done, could be done. And since this is the entrance to our county off of 95, it's the oldest part of the county that was developed, or it has, I shouldn't say oldest, but it has slid downhill. Part of the discussion was to see what we could do to revitalize it. So I wanted this to get out there so that people know what has already been talked about. But of course, all of this revitalization and improvements take money. So we're looking at ways to find funding for that also, and also looking at other localities of what they had done and how they funded it, and if they were successful or not, and learning the lessons from them too. So that's why that's in the packet today too. And there are also the updates for the online baseball comments, and that's in your packet as well. So if there's no questions, or if there are, we can always come back to whatever we want. We can move ahead if everybody is agreeable.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
if I may, as you know, the Board of Supervisors voted to hire outside counsel to help the committee and the EDA negotiate, potential terms or review potential terms for any proposed stadium. And the county attorney is currently gathering information on potential attorneys that could represent the EDA and the board as well in these negotiations.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Do you know if he's working with the EDA's attorney to,
Yes, he is. He
Okay.
is in communication with
Thank
the
you.
EDA's attorney on this as well.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
do we have an idea of what the cost per hour of this attorney would be, and have we down selected to at least one or two at this point?
Well, the one that was brought up at the board meeting on Tuesday was, I do believe, $575 an hour. So the board had voted to allocate up to $30,000 to go towards that expense.
So I'd never do
yes.
math in public because it's embarrassing, but that's less than 50 hours of work at that rate, correct?
52, I do believe.
Just hate to ever do math in public, but,
Yeah.
okay, I just wanted to kind of get a
somewhere around there,
generalization.
right.
All right, thank you.
Right. Well, one thing I will tell you that I did ask our attorney to make sure on a couple of things. One is that we did search out more than just one, since the board has now given their direction to move ahead with that. And then in addition to that was to basically check the references and make sure that, because my concern is, no offense to the lawyers here, anywhere that they might be, but when they charge by the hour, they don't read as fast as they probably could or work as quickly as they probably could. So, hourly workers, you get paid by the hour. But but what I would like to find out is the last people that whoever we choose went and worked for, how was their experience? Would they hire that person again? Did they go in thinking it would cost $100,000 and it cost 5 times the amount? We need to make sure that those questions are answered, and I do believe that that is what they're in the process of finding out.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Any other questions? That's all? Okay.
I have a
Yes, sir.
question. Are we just putting out essentially new business at this point?
Sure.
Baseball discussion?
Yes.
POAM, where are we on that? Because I think what we talked about last time was some of the activities that we talked about, or some of the things we wanted to have come out of our negotiations were going to be part of our POAM, but there really still is no formal POAM. So where are we on that? Love these mics. At least I haven't seen it.
I love these mics too. At least up till this point, we did not have it simply because I think a lot of that was contingent upon whether or not the board would go ahead and hire outside counsel. So now that that has happened, I think that that would be something to discuss for tonight and get moving on.
And as I just looked down and saw that on there, that will not develop and they'll be discussed at the next baseball committee meeting. So thank you.
Quite welcome. Anybody else?
Actually, I
And,
did have
yeah.
another question.
Yes, sir.
Alternate locations.
Yes.
How many do you have at this point? How many locations are being considered at this point?
Well, the county has not been contacted directly by anybody about this. What the reference was, and the story in the paper was today, was the waiver letter that the county had seen back in February that allowed the team to explore down here.
Right.
Identified 3 sites, and the one site in Thornburg was X'd off because of the location to Richmond. And so the other 2 sites were the ones that were already identified.
Okay, you're aware that, according to public record, the site on the other side of I-95 from the property originally identified is currently in litigation, right? And I'd be really surprised if that was an available site for us for baseball.
Is currently what? I
It's
didn't hear.
in litigation. It's tied up in litigation. It's public record.
Well, I'm not getting in the middle of that. But
I'm just letting you know, so it may not be a viable alternative in the short term, unless there's something that's changed.
Okay,
All right, just throwing that out there.
right. Anybody else? Or we can move ahead. A couple of the things that we had talked about from last meeting, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, Garrett, because I know that I saw you running in the door. So you did mention that Mr. Joyce had brought up a question about how many people would be required to be hired, and you had said that you would be willing to contact Sugar Land, Texas.
I did. I contacted Jennifer May, the Director of Economic Development for Sugar Land, Texas, and I asked her a couple of questions. That one included, I asked what their revenue sources were for their agreement. The stadium was, she replied in a couple of stages, she replied that the stadium was funded by a Sugarland 4B corporation, which is an economic development sales tax corporation set up. And essentially, they created a sales tax to fund it, which was approved by the voters. And then there...
I'm sorry, can I ask a question real quick?
Sure.
That sales tax, was that
That's not-
countywide, citywide, district-wide, do you know?
That's just countywide.
Okay, so the entire county?
Right.
Okay.
Right. That's not a mechanism I think we have.
No, we
other
don't. I'm just,
mechanisms, but then they also get a base rent of $80,000 annually. And Sugarland was a good comparison because they're one of the newest. They're very new and similar in size. They also, so they get $80,000 annually, and they get a participation rent, which is 40% of revenues in excess of $2.6 million annually from ticket sales, suite license sales, and naming rights payments. So then I replied and asked, I said, thanks for the information. So based on a short list of entitlements, do you think it's a big win? Is there much over the $2.6 million that you're actually getting 40% of? And I asked finally, would it pay for itself if not for the special sales tax? And she said that we think the stadium is a win in terms of what it provides to the community versus a direct benefit to the city. I'm assuming she means financially. The annual rent and participation rent are very helpful, but they do not cover the debt service for the stadium. With that said, since the club is responsible for all O&M, we believe we have a successful arrangement. We have not had to hire any additional staff. I don't think there have been really any unforeseen costs to the city or economic development office. So that's it in a nutshell.
thank you very much. It is interesting to see, as you just said in there, and others that I've looked at, is just ways that communities view these. You know, some look at them as a way for economic development, others look at them as simply another park, another asset,
Right, something to do.
another thing for the community, right? So I think that, as we had stated before, we need to make sure that we keep that in mind so that we're not comparing, you know, two different ways of looking at something like this.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
I find it interesting, though, that they decided to tax the entire community, the entire county, for one particular business. So it really kind of put that burden on everyone, where the discussions in this committee has been the taxes on, or if we were to do, for example, an event tax, that would be only on people coming into the county and people going to that particular event. So you just shifted the tax burden to everybody in the county. And, you know, people who come into the county, of course, but the majority of the taxpayers would shoulder the burden of this endeavor if that were to be the case.
Mr. Chair.
Right? Yes, ma'am.
However, they did have a referendum that said they wanted to do that.
Absolutely correct, Ms. Heidig. I agree with you. It was a referendum.
And it is Texas, so they have many different ways to do things than
Just left
than
there.
we do. Yeah.
This afternoon.
It would be interesting to find out if that tax sunsets after the debt service is paid off.
And Mr. Chair, I'd like to say, very rarely do taxes ever get taken away after they've been imposed. Very, very rarely.
Well, I think we should ask our contact with Sugarland, Texas, who's on the committee, if he would mind
I'll
finding
follow
that.
up with that.
That would be great. Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
The last meeting I asked if we could perhaps, and you talked about references for our attorney. Have we gone back to Hagerstown and asked them about how the relationship is with the Hagerstown Suns and how, if they have another option to extend or anything like that? Has any of that occurred between the county and Hagerstown?
I've not spoken directly to anybody in Hagerstown. I will say that, you know, I would expect that the relationship right now is probably not that great between the team and the community, because the team wanted either improvements or a new stadium built to stay in Hagerstown, and they've told Hagerstown that they're shopping to see if they can move the team. So I would expect that the relationship between them is not that great right now.
But Mr. Cole, I assume that under the threat of libel or slander, if you ask him a direct question, for example, to the mayor, he would probably give you a direct answer without any opinion. He would probably just give you basically the facts.
Well, we can try,
Thank you.
contacting them.
Well, we'll remember too that the mayor that's currently there came in once or after the team has decided to go shopping, so.
But the city also has institutional memory, so it's like going to,
Well, the
going
city
to
manager.
Doug could tell you everything for the last 30-plus years in the county.
Right.
So
Well,
there's
I'm-
people there that have that institutional memory, I'm certain.
No, I know, but you were saying specifically the mayor, and the city manager, I do believe, is gone too. So you do have a whole new crop of people, so you will be getting their point of view.
Understood. But at least we can get a point of view.
Right. Would staff like to follow up with that? Thank
Yeah,
you, sir.
we sure will.
Thank you. Any other items moving forward from last meeting? We had an awful lot to discuss. We had the minutes that were sent that kind of summarized what we were discussing. Mr. Cole had sent those out on Friday to us. And then obviously they're in our packet. I think one of the things that we had, or I had talked about and tried to work towards is what I had kept hearing was a lack of revenue to the county, to the EDA. I should remember I kept getting swatted down for that one. And trying to find out if there were other ways that we can generate revenue for the EDA. One of the things that I would like to see, I know that there was one done for Fredericksburg when they were looking to move there, was an actual breakdown of taxes that were directly generated by the stadium, not the offshoot development. If I am correct, it was somewhere between 300,000 and 400,000 that the city was anticipating. And I think that was just based upon the baseball revenue and not all the events, but I could be wrong. But if we can get that answered, that would be great. Because one of the things that I would like to see is more of an explanation of the amount of revenue that is generated. I know that it was a point of contention, and we made the paper for that one too, was the ticket tax. So not to...
You keep looking at me.
I know I keep, because I'm waiting for you to stab me with your pen. But to bring it up and just to, as to make a point, is that if the ticket tax were put on stadium and $1 a person, let's just say, you have 300,000 attendees just to baseball, you would have $300,000 then would go directly to pay down the debt, which is a positive way of doing it. I had asked staff to give me the number of what the taxpayer is now paying for the added road improvements out at the racetrack, because it had to be upped by about $15 million. And so now on our budget, we pay about $1.3 million more, or will be paying $1.3 million more when it's fully implemented for improvements that were needed just because the racetrack came there.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
If I may point out, though, at the time of the discussion, if I remember correctly in the Board of Supervisors, there were two functionally broken intersections. One was Thornburg. The other was 126. And Mr. Skinner was very adamant that 126 needed to be repaired because of the danger of commuters coming off that road.
Mm-hmm.
At Thornburg, those improvements were already on the books. They were merely moved forward in the books and used state matching funds over a number of years to help those improvements move along.
Well,
Now, I know you weren't on the board, nor was I, but I do remember that discussion going on for quite some time.
well, and yes, there were improvements that were being done, but according to VDOT, who has stated many times, they had to be added to the tune of about $15 million because of the raceway.
Who at VDOT?
And, I'm sorry?
Who at VDOT? Because the current head of VDOT is the one who's in that discussion.
Well, then we can get it from, I'm not going to say who said it,
Okay,
but when
that's- but-
VDOT was
I understand,
here,
I understand.
that
but-
was what, so,
I mean, I think, Mr. Cole, I think you were at that meeting too, up in Stafford.
Yeah, there were plans to improve that intersection or that exit previously because the bridge needs replacing and so forth, but those plans did have to be beefed up because of the racetrack.
And the racetrack actually had to pay for part of that improvement too, because of that traffic circle, I believe, over on their side. That was part of their payment. So but it was on the books, and it was merely accelerated rather than, added willy-nilly to help improve a particular
no,
intersection.
it was added to. I mean, they would have done an improvement that would have cost $15 million less. So when the racetrack came, they had to reconfigure what part the racetrack paid. I'm not sure, but I know for a fact it was not $15 million.
Okay, I'll check on it.
And that is part of the bond referendum that was passed back last November. So I say that to again say that with a ticket tax, which is nothing more than a parking tax, which is nothing more than a user fee, that is money generated directly from people using that facility to pay for that facility, as opposed to spreading out the cost to everybody across the county.
Right, but again, as I've said before, and I believe Ms. Heidig also made this point, it's a slippery slope. Where do you stop? And again, those taxes have never been repealed.
Yes, but when you have special legislation from the General Assembly, it is specific as to what you can do. Case in point, we have a furniture and fixtures tax, which I had asked staff to see if we can up the threshold for exemption. We can't, because the legislation states what we can do and what we can't do. So if you would like to say it's a slippery slope, then that slope is going to be slippery down to Richmond to get them to then change it so that we can add and increase it. But if we keep it specific to what we want to do and specifically tied to an area to pay for, then I just don't believe the slippery slope argument. I believe that it's a way to get a public debt paid by those who use the facility.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
if I could just direct my question to Mr. Joyce here on this. In my understanding, I'm just trying to understand where you're coming from, are you suggesting that the Board of Supervisors raise taxes across the board to pay for this?
In no way whatsoever. What I'm
That's what it
saying
sounded
is,
like.
no, that is not at all what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, where do you stop in terms of adding events? Does it become the Renaissance Fair? Does it become the movie theater? Does it become the racetrack? Does it become some other large event that 1,500 people, like a concert? So where do you stop adding a tax? And I'm glad you said it was a tax. Where do you stop adding taxes on people for entertainment? Because again, entertainment dollars don't just come out of the air. They're fixed
It seems
dollars.
to me that you're not wanting an event tax, but you are wanting something that is spread out across the county from every taxpayer to help pay for this. That's what it's sounding like. to
Not
me.
what it sounds like to me.
Mr.
Yes, sir.
Chairman, I'm not sure what county Sugar Land's in, but the Houston metropolitan area is huge and a lot larger than Spotsylvania. So if they had a bond or a referendum to pass that tax, that's the way they decided to do it. I doubt very much that anything like that would ever pass in Spotsylvania. And that being said, I think we need to kind of get back on track here and look at the business opportunity here of the Suns coming to the area. If the Suns come to the area, they're essentially, in my opinion, looking for a partner. In other places that they've looked, it's my understanding that they had a partner in helping to build the stadium. They don't have such a partner here, so they're kind of looking to us to do it. So if we're going to do that, if we do, we need to have as revenue neutral a project as possible, which means revenue sharing, means we should own all the parking, and we should not be obligated in any way whatsoever on replacing the seats in the stadium when they're fully depreciated, the lighting, all that. They need to belly up a little bit more, and we need to ask for more. Revenue sharing is not a tax, and the success of the team, they do well, we do well. And that way, too, if there's no development whatsoever around the stadium, which probably is not likely. We're still revenue neutral. We're covering the debt. There probably will be development, which would be a win, big win for the county. So I think we need to quit worrying about taxing people and get down to the discussion, the business of how do we negotiate this, and can we negotiate in such a way that it's a good deal for the county? Because right now, it doesn't look like a good deal for the county.
Thank you, sir.
I think one of the things that's missing from this equation is how much money is in baseball for these type of events. That's where looking at the financials, where I suggested last week, would also help us figure out, how much juice is in the orange. And so we have to kind of figure that out before we can say how much we need. I don't know if they'll release that information, but
I don't know why they wouldn't. I mean, if they want the EDA to be a partner and build the thing, they'd need, I mean, if you and I were going into business together, wouldn't you want some due diligence on me, just as I would want some on you?
definitely.
Correct. So that should be a requirement, and that our attorney brings up.
Yes, sir, go right ahead.
I'm looking at an article, Lansing, Michigan is roughly 400,000 people. This is the 20th anniversary of the Class A lug nuts who moved into Lansing. There's a couple of articles from this year and one from 2013. What I'm reading here says the profit margin is small, 5 to 10%. This is coming up from the owner of the lug nuts, adding that the lug nuts say they've never lost money on a season, but then the owner, who it's a husband and wife team, says you don't get into this business generally to get rich. You can make some kind of profit margin at it. You have to in any business, or people aren't going to invest. So and this article is headlined about it being a city, Lansing Lug Nuts ownership, facilities, and city partnership make for winning combination. So they're promoting right now that 20 years down the road, this has been good for the city of Lansing. The main point in the article from the city officials seems to be the development around the area of the ballpark. And it also says that the city is spending about $400,000 a year on the commission that they created called the Lansing Entertainment and Public Facilities Authority. So that's, and I have to give my personal interest. I grew up in Lansing, and the ball team came in after I left. It's something I would have loved when I was a kid, I know. But it's also the business of baseball, so to speak. And I don't think it is, I don't think the minor league teams are really big money. And if they were big money, I don't think they'd come to the county asking us to help build the park. I think they'd build the park and make their own money and tell everybody else to stay back while they make their money. But, so anyway, that's
Or bring in a
something to share.
partner.
Right, or bring, you're right. And so they're looking for a public partner in this case.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Garner, was there any discussion, and I'm not familiar with the Sugar Land case, was there, in that case, was there public money to help build the stadium, or was there private investment in that?
There was very little private investment. They got, similar to what our initial proposal was, opening day partners contributed $6 million towards the construction of the stadium. That's it. The rest of it was funded by the Sugar Land 4B Corporation for the Economic Development Sales Tax. Again, we can't do that here, so, but the revenue that comes in now goes back to the EDA, the annual rent plus the excess, the 40% excess of 2.6 million that, in ticket sales that they may or may not reach.
Okay, and I was good to hear that they have the team paying all the O&M. Is that correct?
The team does pay all the O&M. That's correct.
And is there a parking lot there, and who owns that?
I did not ask that question.
Okay, that's fine, that's fair. Thank you.
I think it is important that we do support, and I don't want to speak for any of you all, but I think that the team should be responsible for the maintenance of the stadium. I don't think that the county should have that risk on our side of the books. It's something that it's hard to even get a straight answer from any place, location. It varies, it fluctuates, and so I would much rather see them carry that burden than have us assume any of it. Also, you know, when you have somebody else that's paying for your upgrades, it's much easier to then ask for something maybe a little bit before the life expires, as opposed to trying to take it out to the end of its life so you don't have to pay for it. So when the cost is on you, you know, you are much more frugal with your dollars. So I think having that on them would be paramount for anything that I would then support. So, and I think I keep hearing that from all of us. So is there any way for us to just agree that maybe that is one of the terms that we finalize on our part, and we can move ahead and check that off the list? Yes, sir. Yes? Okay.
We need a motion, or we just all agree?
I saw all shaking heads, so anybody who
Concur.
doesn't agree, say no. Yes. Okay. By consensus, yes, sir. One thing to point out too, Garrett, is that, and I know it's going to be said, is that Sugar Land is an unaffiliated team. They are not affiliated with minor league baseball per se. So, and I'm not sure who pays their players. What kind of lease deal do they have? What guarantees do they have of a team leaving? I think it's, from what I've read, much riskier than this proposal, simply because they can shut down. I know there were several teams in Texas that built stadiums and created a league and ran out of money and shut it all
Right.
down.
Yeah, it was pretty obvious to me that in their case, it would not be possible but for public money. And from what I'm seeing on a lot of other these examples, it's pretty much the same thing. So it boils down to, do we want to use public money for this or not? If we do, then how and how much? So I think those are the big questions that we have to answer.
Thank you. Moving along. One of the things, and I failed to ask staff to do this, but if we need to get an answer to the size of the stadium. If there is a requirement from minor league baseball for teams and what they play in. If you look in the South Atlantic League, you know, they average about 3,200 to 4,500, somewhere around there, per stadium. So it would be nice to make sure that the localities that we're comparing ourselves to are roughly the same size, and after the honeymoon period, you know, how big of a stadium do we actually need? Because that would obviously cut down on the upfront money that we would need to be putting into it. And there's no reason to overbuild.
Mr. Chairman, if I was a team owner or a partner with the team owner, I wouldn't want the stadium to be too big either, because if you have a run of good seasons, you can jack your ticket price up. And if we're revenue sharing, that's good for us.
Absolutely.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Another comment that I've seen and heard often is the current, again, this lease didn't get approved, right? But in that particular lease, there was a really poor ratio of sharing of the facility in terms of having community events versus the team having their events and controlling everything. And I believe we're only allowed to have 6. You know, a lot of people look, if this were to happen, they'd want to see things like, you know, maybe some local baseball championships there, some local events that we could put on there. And that seems to be a continuing concern. And hopefully we could all come to an agreement that we need to have a much better relationship in terms of sharing the facilities between the team and us, if it were to come to fruition.
I wholeheartedly agree, and I would say that if the county or the EDA is to own this, we should be able to use the stadium as much as we want. Obviously, if they have events that are scheduled and things, you know, baseball season has certain games that are scheduled, and they might have events with concert promoters and whatnot to have events. So obviously, we would work around that. to make sure that the revenue is brought in, because then hopefully we would have a revenue sharing agreement. So we wouldn't want to step on the toes of us, the county and the EDA, getting that money, but I would say it should be unlimited. There's no reason why it should be limited, especially if we're footing the bill, we're owning the stadium. Our taxpayers are the ones that are on the hook, and we're not going to be told by the person leasing it from us when we can and can't use it. So I would put forward that it would be unlimited, with those caveats that, of course, when there's events and whatnot.
Yep.
that
I
we wouldn't
suspect that
interfere.
unlimited would be the entry point of the negotiation. I suspect it would come back and forth until something is arrived upon. But
Right.
yes, I agree with you.
Yeah, we start with unlimited and they start with none, and we'll figure it out. Yes. Right. Yeah, they started with 6.
That's going
Yes,
to
sir.
enter into the O&M at some point from their standpoint then too, I'm sure. That they're going to want to, okay, well, if we'll handle baseball O&M, you have to handle the rest. I'm assuming is where they're going to come. I'm just suggesting they're going to come back with that.
And they'll be concerned about things like damage to the field, damage to the facility,
Exactly.
things like that.
I asked that question to Sugarland, and they said during ball season, the field is pretty much off limits. The rest of the building is available for other things, but the field itself, you can't touch it because they maintain it, and it has to be ready for the next game. But after that, like for most of the month of December, they have this Christmas thing where they set up lights on the field and people walk through a maze, and it's kind of neat. But that's also run by the team.
Since you have this long-standing relationship with Sugarland, can you find out also, it seems as though the locality has built the stadium, and the team has moved in there with a long-term lease, and they have also agreed to then promote the stadium and bring events in. I would be curious to find out what Sugarland estimates that cost savings to them being, that they don't have to promote. Because if we had to promote the stadium, how many people would we have to hire outside of baseball, just for events outside of the core function of the leasee? How many people would we have to hire? What would that cost? I'm just curious what they think that they're saving, or they think they're getting out of it, because that's, from my point of view, you're having the private sector run a tourism program, basically, for your county, and bring in people, and their motivation is profit. So they're not going to sit back and say, well, we did our 2 events this year, and I'm still going to get paid, so it doesn't matter. The more that they can pack that,
Okay.
the better.
I'll ask.
Thank you. You're our liaison. Yes.
Are you making a motion?
On your own.
Oh, we'll send you, but you have to pay for it yourself. Sorry. So we went through maintenance, use of facility. One of the other things that we had talked about, and I don't know if it was if there was any point of contention, was the possibility of extending the financing period, and with having the lease go along with that, absolutely, from 25 to 30 years. I do know that there is another team somewhere, or I have all these numbers in my head, but I do know I have seen at least a proposal for that. It might have been a news article or something, but to say that it's unheard of might be true, but I would like to track that down a little bit if staff can just follow up with that question and see. And then also in conjunction with that if we extend the bond payment by another 5 years, lease term, what would that do to the yearly payment? And I know, granted, working with the old numbers but that's the structure we have to work with for now.
I think the 20 years may correspond with the life expectancy of a stadium.
Okay.
I haven't asked or looked at Hagerstown to see how long were they there. But obviously, 38?
38 is when they started.
Okay, so they've probably been through a few renovations. I know in Prince William County, they're on their second renovation now, and I don't think they've been there but 20-something years. I went to high school up there, and they were building it then. So it may have something to do with that. They want to see what what condition it's in, and if you're going to be up to the task of renovating it or not, because they don't want to have responsibility for the building. So if you're not, they need an out. So that's probably why 20 years. I'm just guessing, but it makes
No,
sense.
I do think that that does make sense. The current one that they had proposed was 25 years. And I think that, I had heard that that was why, but if we can bump it up, I'm just wondering if it's all possible, if it's advantageous for the county or not. And if it's not, we don't have to explore it any further. One of the other things that I think that we can all agree upon, going through the term sheet, would be competitively bid the stadium. And I don't, that we should make that non-negotiable. Size of the stadium. Then we got down to the revenue sharing that we had talked about for a little bit. It's interesting what you had brought up, Garrett, about the revenue sharing on, is that gross or net over that amount?
She didn't specify,
Okay.
and I didn't ask.
It would be interesting to see if that is even an avenue to go down, as opposed to splitting revenue on tickets. How about a guaranteed amount? And then everything above and beyond that would be split a certain way.
Well, the starting point ought to be gross.
Correct.
Yeah.
Which they're going to push back because they're paying for all the maintenance. So, they would, which is
Well-
fine. I'm not saying we
If
don't.
I was them and I was in a net arrangement, I'd drive my expenses up so high that you had nothing.
Right.
So gross has got to be the way to go.
Right, but, I'm sorry, yes, ma'am.
I'm agreeing that that is the way to go. And we can sit here and say, well, yeah, but we don't think they'll go for it. Well, to me, we're not arguing their position tonight. We're putting together ours. So, from my perspective, I think that's what we ask for. And then let them come back with a counteroffer. Because one thing we don't want to start doing is say, well, they'll never accept that, so maybe we should do this. And then we're negotiating with ourselves instead of with the team.
Plus, they can watch this on TV.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
we just discussing a percentage of revenue of ticket sales, or are we taking into consideration concessions? Because I know at these facilities, concessions might be close to as high as the ticket sales. And are we taking in what we're asking for? Is it just the percentage of the concessions, or just the tickets, or possibly an overall?
I'm in favor of proposing overall. That's food, beverage, wearables, ticket sales. And
Naming-
I still think we
naming
ought to own
rights.
the parking.
When they came into the EDA meeting and initially discussed this with us at the start, one of the things that they mentioned was that they had a target amount a typical family would spend on a Friday to come to the event. And they used the analogy of going out to the movie theater and getting an easy bite to eat. So they threw out a number. I can't remember how much it was, but I remember it was reasonable considering I'm a family of 4, and that's about what we spend on a Friday night.
Wasn't it like $40?
It was something like that. I was really surprised on how low it was.
And it wasn't the team, it was the gentleman that's the stadium, I forget his name now.
Peter Cook.
Yeah, right.
Well, he owns a stadium, so.
Right.
Yeah.
65?
65? 64?
I know I can't go to the movies for $40.
I mean, if the tickets cost $10 a piece, then you're not buying anything else.
Yeah, right.
60, okay.
Right. Right. So if we're looking more towards a percentage of the gross sales in the entire stadium on everything, that's what we're throwing out there. Okay.
Well, that's an important point, too, because the county has upwards of 200 tickets per game that they can give out. And of course, there's no revenue on sales if you have that tax, but potentially you could get revenue on concessions that those people would bring to the stadium, would
Right.
purchase at the stadium.
Right.
Mr. Chair, having
ma'am.
also already said we shouldn't be arguing against ourselves, I would like to point out that we do get a percentage of meals tax on the concessions
And sales.
and
tax.
sales tax on the
Right.
shirts and other paraphernalia as well, which
Right.
can be part of our consideration, I think,
Well, absolutely.
on those items.
Right. Well, I'm not sure if we're agreeing to a certain percentage or just in concept that might be the best way to go as far as a revenue sharing idea. And if there is some sort of threshold that they meet, and then everything above and beyond that is what we talked about. And it was intriguing to hear from Sugar Land how they do it. So I think that that's something to really consider, because then again, it's performance-based, and the county then, or the EDA, would then be receiving a portion of how well it does. Is that something we would like to put as far as revenue sharing, that's the direction we would like to go? Any objections? Should we leave it that vague right now? And then we'll fill in the specifics as it goes along?
Well, I think, Mr. Chair, if I may, once we kind of get our starting position and talk with our attorney,
Right.
then I think it's going to begin, we're going to synthesize a much better approach, a much better solution on our side.
Okay.
For the attorney to present.
Okay. So we'll just leave it as is and get guidance from an expert on who's done these before? Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
now, are we talking about this? I think we're talking more about ticket sales and concessions from baseball revenue, but we'd also discussed the split of revenue on the sales, ticket sales and so forth of non-baseball events. So are we,
I think we're talking about gross on the entire,
so
the
instead of
entirety.
separating the percentage between non-baseball events and baseball events,
Right.
we're talking more about a complete split of revenue of the entire, whatever the county brings it in, the baseball team brings it in, or,
Let them run the events.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say it's on the entirety of what happens at that locale. And then what the specifics are, we'll defer to our expert, very highly paid attorney.
The team is going to have its specific things it has to do for baseball games, but it's an entertainment facility and it's an entertainment business. The baseball, if you do a survey at the end of the game, ask people what the score was as they leave, you're going to find half of them won't even know who was playing. And they won't even realize it was a Spotsylvania game. So we're talking about an entertainment proposal. I mean, yeah. So, so that just, I think that's the important thing. So if you put they're going to have to separate baseball operations because they have to honor the league rules.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the only part. Other than that, they want to be an entertainment company. That's where they're going to make their money. They're going to make more money off of non-baseball games, probably.
And that's a good point. That's why they're going to have the little water park for the kids that get bored and, don't want to sit there any longer.
Or adults that get bored and don't want to sit there any longer.
That have
Yeah.
had too much to drink and need
Right,
to,
well.
right, yeah.
That's, yeah, right, okay. So that is another one to check off. Is there any other input on that? Seem to be pretty comfortable with that.
Mr. Chair, I'm just
Yes, sir.
reviewing the previous proposed lease. We want to pay particular attention to the definitions of merchandise, concessions, gross, and I'm reviewing it right now. Some of the ways those are written can be rather tricky, so obviously the attorney's going to pay particular care to that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah. moving along on the checklist, we've done the size, we've done, well, one of the things is the public safety aspect of the facility, how much that would cost, and who bears that responsibility.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
I know from my experience with the Virginia Wineries Association, and we do a big wine festival every year, and we have attended many other wine festivals, and the burden of those expenses usually falls to the promoter as opposed to the county in which the festival is happening. So I would like to have as a starting position that costs of that kind for public safety be borne by the team or the promoter of the event, whatever that event is, as opposed to being a burden on the county.
Another good reason to let them be the promoter and us stay out of the event business.
Any other input? I think it's a good starting position. So we'll start with that and see where it takes us. Sorry. Visitor center, or a visitor center of some sort shall be located in the stadium that will be run by the tourism department of the county. The other thing that had come up, and we need to get this very much clarified and defined and specified, is the fact that the old lease had called for 4, I do believe it was, digital boards to be placed around the county. We need to make sure that with our expert, he defines exactly what is going to be going on with them, where they're to be located, what that looks like. You know, what property is that located, who bears the cost of that. I mean, that is something that could actually really start costing a lot of money. Yes, sir.
I would say we propose no signs like that. Why should we bear the burden of that? I mean, what are they for?
Well, I think that they are for promotion of a game happening. So you place them around the community and remind people, you know, Thursday night, 7 p.m., so-and-so's playing so-and-so. I can see the upside for the county to have some use of that at some point, because we do many events around the county ourselves, Stars and Stripes, June. That would have been really slick if I had the.
I mean, where
date
would
in
you
mind.
envision those being placed?
That was
Well,
going to
that-
be my question.
that's the
Where
question.
exactly are we going to put them?
Well, that's the question, is that if we are being asked to put them up, and I do believe that was part of the project. Yes, the project cost. I thought that the boards were part of that, if my recollection is correct. But regardless of where the money comes from, the locations of those, because we would then get into, you know, purchasing space on somebody's land to locate a board, who would install them, who would maintain them, you know, what would that even look like? So,
If you like, I can read, I've got in front of me stadium signage, but you're talking about, because it talks about not only stadium signage, but it talks about other locations outside in the county. It says, in here it says in the city, because clearly it was modified from the city agreement. If you like, I can read it.
well, yeah, that's fine.
It says stadium signage, and it's on page 9. The stadium owner shall be responsible to ensure that the project budget in Schedule B includes the purchase and installation of a quality double-sided video board, 2 outfield wall ribbon boards for sponsorship sign displays, 2 marquee video entrance boards, 8 color remote controlled signboards through key locations in city and in and at the stadium, in the parenthetical, the video displays. An amount necessary to provide video displays equal to or greater than the quality of those currently in existence at other similar stadiums. The video displays shall include software and hardware necessary for operation and 3 remote control cameras to broadcast games on video boards and through cable TV. That's the end of that paragraph.
Thank you. Yeah, my question would be the ones that are placed throughout the community, not necessarily the ones in the stadium, I understand. I mean, that's part of the construction of the stadium. But having them located outside of there,
I'm sorry, I think
Yeah.
what's key here is where it says 8 color remote controlled display boards through key locations in city and in and at the stadium. So it kind of clumps them into one, and it breaks that, excuse me, I think breaks it out in Central B.
Maybe we should see if they can rent space on Spotsylvania Mall's marquee, as opposed to putting up some, I just don't know where we'd put them. You can't put them
Right.
on the interstate.
right.
I don't think the feds would let us do that. So then the question becomes,
Well, what kind of displays are they too? Because
Right.
we're looking at our ordinance, so we don't want to buy boards ourselves that are not in
that
compliance
was
with our
my
ordinance.
underlying thought.
Right.
Are we putting ourselves in a position where we have to do something on an ordinance that I don't think we want to do?
Right.
I say we just drop it,
Okay, so any of the outside signage
other than
is,
in the stadium part, but outside, drop it.
okay.
It sounds
I
ghastly
mean, even
expensive to
as
me.
going up to FedEx Field, I don't remember external signage on any of the roads or the Beltway.
Or the squirrels.
Yeah, I haven't been, and you're right, going down to the stadium, I mean, there's a sign that says there's a stadium there, but they don't really say much.
The
so-
advertisement is seeing the stadium, seeing the lights from 95.
When you see the lights are on, there's a game going on, yeah. The,
have the same thing.
right, absolutely. The other part of the advertising that you talked about, Ms. Joyce, was I want to make sure that it's very clear that the county has prominent advertising space inside the stadium. And whether we use that for Parks and Rec or any of the other things that we do, economic development, EDA, the schools, anybody, we need to make sure that in our stadium we have prominent displays for advertising, which also goes to that the county's name being prominently displayed on the building. These past couple, I'm going to look and see if there's any objections to any of these so that we can start cleaning up our term list and moving it along. Any objection to dropping the outside signage? Any objection to having our name prominently displayed on the stadium? No. Any objection to having prominent advertising space inside the stadium, including, the outfield wall?
You might want to define what percent of signage in the stadium would be. You need a negotiating point to start with.
Right.
You don't want to just say, we want some, because you're going to end up with 5%.
Right. Well, that, if we can put an asterisk next to that for our attorney.
I mean, we might want to say, kind of how many signs are going to be in the stadium, and then say we want a percentage of those signs. Because, when you watch like a Nationals game, the signboards behind the home plate are changing constantly. So I don't know whether these people go after sponsors like the. Really? Oh, they're not really there? They're on green screen? Ah, that's a good point. But I know at Redskins games, there are signs all around the upper deck.
Right, so we make sure that we get a percentage of fixed signs and not this TV trickery that they do. Right.
Signs out by the road, you wouldn't consider that an external sign? Just, right at the edge of the parking lot where you could see what's playing that day?
Now, I would assume that anything out in the community outside of the complex would be an outside sign.
Okay.
Not outside the facility itself or the footprint itself, let's say.
I could see possibly maybe at the two ends of that street, if for
Right.
example, we used DeVaco's property, he might like that as well. Maybe he can something. But, at the two ends, because those are pretty busy streets, Route 1 at the bottom of the hill and then Courthouse Road at the top of the hill.
Mhm.
That might be a place to put them.
But we would limit the amount then, how's that? So, we're still negotiating, so this is not a finalized, but yeah, that's a good point, to make sure that we don't limit ourselves.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
on the signage inside the stadium, like the advertising signage that goes around the outfield, typically in a minor league stadium, your seating is from usually just past the third baseline, around behind the backstop, past the first base. Then all the outfield is signage. So usually it's a fence. A lot of times there's a double fence. I haven't seen the design. So you can get a lot of advertising space out there. I would just be wondering what the county would be advertising on it, what they're trying to promote on that type of signage versus having private companies that are usually paying pretty decent money to buy that space, which is a revenue sharing point that we're, sharing that we're trying to achieve to help with the revenue sharing. I'd just be curious of what type of signs we would be considering to put, a certain amount of sign space in an outfield, along an outfield. Basically, in a minor league stadium, the outfield fence and the fence behind it is usually just a huge billboard of many different advertisers. So I'd be curious of what kind of signage that the county would really need and what we're trying to promote within the county with that signage. Because it's a fixed, those are fixed painted signs. It's not something you're going to be able to really change what you're trying to promote. I would see if we had some space somewhere we could change it, where the county was trying to provide multiple events or advertise multiple events. It might be, whatever it may be, the 4th of July festival, 1 week, stuff, but most of those are fixed-base signs, and I would just wonder how much signage the county would really need for that.
I would say on the outfield wall, I don't think we would need, but maybe, one. But it would be any of the other advertising signs within the stadium itself that might be smaller and might be able to be changed out more frequently, just so that we make sure that we don't not bring that point up. And then when this is all finalized, we look back and say, geez, I wish we would have had 1 or 2 or 3. And the point would not be to reduce the amount of revenue on the outfield wall. I don't want to take up half of it with our own signs, but part of it would be to also reinforce our identity as, you're in the county. We're not in Fredericksburg, by the way. So that would be my thought process behind it. But you're right. We want to make sure that we are able to generate as much revenue as possible, especially if we're going to do a revenue share agreement. It would be beneficial to the county, obviously, to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, so we're through that point. We had talked about naming rights. I would say that would get thrown into the overall gross revenue, so that wouldn't have to be a specific item. Unless the overall gross revenue idea is rejected, then that would have to be resurrected in some fashion. Capital improvements, since the stadium would be owned by the EDA, capital improvements would have to be done at some point. I think that we would need guidance from our lawyer to see exactly how to word that so that we're not on the hook every time our leasee wants something new done or some addition added or something changed, just to make sure that we are only doing needed capital improvements. All shaking heads. Okay. Oh, I saw you shake your head, so it's okay. Don't worry about it. When it comes to capital improvements, that we make sure that they're very specified so that the leasee can't come to us and say, well, we want this done, and according to the agreement, we must do all capital improvements. Yeah, okay. Just to make sure that we're covered, that we're only doing necessary stuff. For example, even the upkeep of a Class A ball field that minor league baseball might think needs to be changed in 5 years from now, so all of a sudden we're supposed to do this, and we're on the hook for that. We need to make sure that that is fully engaged.
And Mr. Chair, what I was actually looking at was under the definition of gross revenue, it includes everything in section 6, A through O, which includes advertising, concessions, and, alcohol, pricing, quality, stadium naming rights, all those are in there. So I was just basically going back to their original proposal, their original offer, so we're gonna have to definitely tinker with section 6 of their,
Okay.
in our counteroffer.
Mr. Chairman, I wonder if it would be possible to negotiate the capital improvements to be paid for by the team, which reduces or offsets their revenue. That could be like some sort of offset that we settle up at the end of each year or something like that. That way,
Right.
we're not running out there adding more dirt. They are. They add the dirt and then we settle up later
Right.
on the revenue sharing when it comes to capital improvements, nothing else.
No, I don't know if any of this is possible, but that we're here just to put together our list. I think the last one, at least, well, one of the last ones, is the annual payment. The original was 150. Well, actually, the original was 300,000, but the county was then on the hook for paying utilities, so that was taken out. Utilities was estimated to be 150, so they said, fine, we will pay all the utilities, but we're only going to pay you 150 for rent. So that's how that came about. So now that they're paying all of the maintenance, I do believe that we should still stick with a $250,000 rent payment with an escalator that would be reviewed every. I mean, of course, this would be up to the lawyer to give us the specific language, but every 5 years or so that we adjust it to make sure that we're keeping up with inflation, because there's no point to having 250,000 where 20 years from now it's not worth but half of that. It doesn't even make sense. So, any disagreement or other comments?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
there's an individual here in the county who has proposed to offer us independent, neutral analysis of this. It's Mr. Al King, and he's offered up free services to kind of go through this and look at consumer price index and what potentially incremental charges could be based on every iteration that we have of this. So I'd like to suggest that we use his free services, and he's a very experienced man in this type
Mr. Chairman.
of activity.
Mr. Joyce has actually stolen a point that I was going to bring up later when we started talking about the need to under the items for follow-up and further discussion, itemized list of all costs, that Mr. King has offered his services to develop the kind of spreadsheet where, as we were talking about last week, when you squeeze the balloon at one end, it pops out at another. And it would be an Excel worksheet that would enable us to do it. Now, he's saying he's not the one who's going to necessarily put the numbers in. He will rely on us for the assumptions and the numbers that go in it. And I certainly believe that with his experience in years of capital expenditure analysis, that since the price is absolutely right for this, and he's certainly willing to do it on his own time. And I would like to agree with Mr. Joyce's recommendation that we ask Al to do this for us.
Ms. Hayek, I didn't realize you were going to bring that up, or I would have held
Oh, no, that's
held
right.
fire on
I
that.
mean, it doesn't matter who,
Yeah.
I just was waiting to figure out when would be the good time to bring it up. And he actually approached me after the meeting last week, and I said, send me an email, which he did. I had forwarded it to Chris, and I didn't have everybody's email addresses, or I would have forwarded. I probably should have sent it to Mark, but I did want to bring it up tonight as well and suggest that this might be an avenue that we might want to take advantage of.
Thank you. Can I suggest that we bring that up once we're done with our term sheet? But it is a good idea. And Ann did actually ask me before the meeting, so she was, okay. She really did,
I
honestly.
believe you. I
Okay.
didn't know.
Okay.
I rolled in late because I came straight from the airport to here, so I
Okay.
didn't get any preview of anything.
Gotcha, no problems. So the rent payment with an escalator, 250,000.
On, Mr. Chairman, on the rent escalator, I mean,
Yes, sir.
maybe that should be looked at in terms of a percentage rather than a specific dollar amount, 3% every 3 years, or,
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Keep up with inflation
Yeah.
is the biggest part
Right.
of that.
We might even want to look at an escalator clause that's indexed to inflation
right.
or something like that in order to do it.
And Ms. Heidi, actually, I think what Mr. King proposed was link it to CIP. And so that way it would be, commensurate with whatever rise or loss occurs in the local
Right.
region.
And that would make much more sense. And then the last item that I have on the list here is the issue dealing with parking.
Mr. Chair, just one more thing.
Yes, ma'am.
The bullet under the thing we were just discussing, where it has a dollar amount that says the EDA should receive at least, I would like to not have something like that in it, because then what we're saying is total gross revenues and everything else, that's all we expect to get, plus including the rent. And it's a very low number, and I'm not going to say it in case they're watching on TV.
Well, what I would like to do, well, as I think the board, more than the committee, would be to find a way to get the EDA a funding stream, maybe not directly from the stadium revenue, but maybe an offshoot from.
Oh, absolutely, but I would expect it to be greater than that.
Right. Well, so let's remove that whole part then. Sorry, Ronnie. Moving on with parking. You know, Mr. Joyce had brought up parking and how we would need to own it. It really, again, all depends on what the land agreement is. that
The
is
EDA
filed.
would own it.
Yes, sir, the EDA. Funny when you have 4 EDA members on a committee, how many times you get reminded about that. But it depends on the land agreement. But I mean, if the EDA were to own the parking, the maintenance on the parking then would have to be, taken into consideration. So then obviously we would need to charge for parking so that the maintenance would be taken care of at minimum. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chair, I absolutely agree with that. I would strike the end of that sentence after et cetera, because what you're really doing there is you're saying they can do it for everything but the ball games.
Right.
And I would say we do it for everything.
I think that the bottom line of it is that if we own it, we charge for it, and if we charge for it, we maintain it. So that's
Right.
something to keep in mind. But then that's where we get guidance from the expert of how exactly to word that, because I would assume that the team is taking into consideration on their revenue side parking. And if they
Well,
are,
in the original contract, it basically said parking would be free, but if there was to be a fee, the leasee would determine what it was. And I think by sort of exempting them from this, then what you're actually doing too is saying, okay, we're not going to do it when it's being used by the leasee, which is events and ball games. And then the leasee comes in and says, okay, and we're charging $7 a space, and we get all the revenue. I'm not sure I would like to see that.
yes, sir.
My little vision of it is, from a negotiating standpoint, at least to begin with, is EDA owns it, EDA takes in all revenue. It has nothing to do with baseball. It's an EDA project so that the EDA can build a permanent revenue stream. And if the baseball team wants to include parking in their ticket price, then they can pay, a fee to the EDA for that. We don't just give it to them.
Wait. Are we talking about a parking fee?
Possibly.
I'm poking the bear a little bit here to talk about an emissions tax and a
It's not a
parking
tax, but
fee.
have you ever
That's slightly different from what was
Yeah.
discussed earlier, Mr. Yak.
EDA is not allowed to tax, so it's a fee.
Okay.
It's rent.
Yeah. How else are we going to maintain it?
I'm not disagreeing. I'm playing devil's advocate for the admissions fee, because if we call it a fee, I think it would be better.
Well, it depends
But
on
go
whether
ahead.
it's the ticket price or in addition to the ticket price.
Well, it would be a flat fee. Anyway, so we do need to then understand how the charge will be made, and I would assume that it might be split with the team somehow, because are we going to set up a ticket taker with all the expense that goes with that too, for parking?
Or the machine?
Right,
Yeah.
but then we have,
Contract to maintain.
right, well, we should explore how much that would be, and then what we would have to charge for parking, and would it be enough to cover our cost and make money, or would it be so exorbitant that nobody would want to park there?
Or would we consider having a private entity build a parking garage and no cost to us, and they run the parking garage, neither the team nor us? I mean,
At the original proposal?
potentially, you know, have
Oh,
have a private
absolutely.
investor come in and do it.
Yeah.
So that's something to look at also.
Right,
Consider security.
right. Right. And then the upkeep, and if you have a facility, there's maintenance and capital improvements and everything that goes along with it.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
when I saw the presentation, I thought that part of the parking, the way they were going to do the parking is hopefully, as this thing developed, we were going to have a shared parking arrangement with some of the development around there. I thought there was a comment made that the parking had to be within a 10-minute walk or something along those lines. And, you know, so, I mean, what I envisioned, you know, depending on what site it goes on, is that you're going to have maybe office buildings and that type of stuff, and they'll be sharing the parking. And, you know, which would, you know, that would be a cost that the developer, or whoever's developing around, would, I assume, would be paying for those parking spaces to build that, which wouldn't be an expense that we would have. And I'm not sure that you would have boundaries to charge parking. But, I mean, that way you wouldn't have to, you know, if that was a shared agreement, and hopefully this thing is going to drive the development. I mean, I think it will, and it's going to be a big, you know, it's going to help our tax base with the development that it drives. But if we could have some kind of shared parking agreement with the developer, that
Well-
would cut out a lot of maintenance fees and paving and stripe and, you know, stuff that has to be done every so often.
Maybe I'm getting feeble, but wasn't the original proposal that the developer would ante up the parking area and the team would be allowed to use it because it has to be within 10 minutes of, baseball requires that it's within 10 minutes walk. And at some point, the developer is going to want to develop retail or restaurants or whatever on that land, which was going to put us in the position of having to build a garage. So if we start off from the get-go by owning the land for the parking and it becomes our business,
Well,
then
we would
we
have to
don't
get
get
the
forced into building a garage necessarily.
Well, the only problem with that is the actual owning of the land. And I'm not sure that the landowner would give up that land to us under the first arrangement. So, but the ideal way, and the way I'd like to see it go, is actually have a private entity build, maintain, charge, and we pay them for the use of a parking garage. And then that way we wouldn't have to have any of that liability or expense.
And Mr. Chair, if
Yes,
I
sir.
may point out, the original lease says the lessee, shall have the exclusive use of all on-property parking and off-property parking for all events at the stadium, including the exclusive right to determine whether parking fees will be charged, the amount of any parking fees, and to retain all such fees. The lessee may, in sole discretion, charge parking fees in any amount for any event. And that's taken out of the paragraph, but that's kind of the gist of our discussion here about
So
parking fees and who can get what.
I guess we can say that we understand where they're coming from.
Well, Mr.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, right now, we have no, you know, we have no sort of property deal or anything else. And what we're saying with this is we're looking at what we need, what we think we would like to see, in order to meet certain goals, one of which is to ensure funding stream for the EDA. And certainly, at some future point, once things become finalized, I mean, this contract could get thrown out the window, and nothing would come of any of this. And we're not tonight trying to, one, negotiate the contract, or two, with the ball team, nor are we trying to negotiate a contract with the contractor. And so I think what we want to do is put down that if based on the original premise that the county would have to provide the bonds to build the parking garage, if the parking garage had to be built in such a manner that the EDA would own it and the EDA would get the revenue from it and the EDA would decide on the price of parking and other things, and that's what we want in the contract. It may come at a later date when the developer comes in and says, well, you know, I really want to build that parking garage instead. I don't know that any developer would do that. And well, then we can say, okay, well, we can talk about that, and then we have to look, I guess, you know, at either a revenue loss for the EDA or some way to maintain some revenue stream for the EDA under that type of scenario. But we're not here looking at all these different scenarios. We're looking at specifically what do we want to see in the contract that we hand to the Hagerstown Suns.
Thank you for keeping us on track. So does that sound pretty good for everybody? There any?
I mean, there's a whole lot of stuff that's still going to have to be negotiated.
Right.
And looked at and planned on.
But the bottom line is, if we own it and we're paying for it, we should charge it. You know, we're not going to build it and let you charge for it and reap the benefit when we have to pay for it. It just doesn't make sense. All right. Well, that has gone through the list. Anything else that I have missed or anybody else would like to bring up?
Mr. Chair, I didn't hear it as one of our items for follow-up and further discussion in our minutes, an itemized list of all soft costs associated with the project. And looking back at my notes, I think that was a discussion of getting a realistic estimate of maintenance, O&M, maintenance costs from the stadium, and that way we have a good understanding of what potentially we would be on the hook for or what we need to negotiate with the team.
Actually, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Joyce, that was one of the, that was exactly where I was going to bring up Mr. King, because he's worked on a sort of a, he started, like with major points on a spreadsheet, revenues, expenditures. But to me, this is the kind of thing that I think we all had agreed at some point we needed to kind of lay out so that we could play with the numbers. And that's, the soft costs, of course, are part and parcel of all that we're discussing here, and who's going to be responsible for them. And a lot of it goes back to, who's going to be paying for security, who's going to be paying for maintenance, who's going to be paying for O&M.
I thought by consensus, the negotiating standpoint is we're not paying for any of that from earlier on this evening. Wasn't it, or did I misunderstand?
That may be because maybe I don't understand terminology in terms of soft cost and other things, but I mean, we had said they were going to pay all the O&M, they were going to pay the maintenance.
Well, I think it would be helpful to have those numbers just when they come back.
I agree with that,
And
absolutely.
they say no, that we're not playing catch-up.
We also agreed that they would pay for all the safety issues that are there as
Well,
well.
I was just using that as an example.
No,
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
If I could, I mean, listening to this discussion, it just kind of emphasizes to me that we need an expert in baseball, stadiums and operations on our team. The baseball owners, I mean, they know all that stuff, but they're kind of on the other side of the negotiating table. So when you ask them a question, they'll look and say, well, I don't think so, or yeah, that's okay. And we don't know if we're leaving money on the table or not. So that's why I think it's really important for us to get an expert, under contract like the board has authorized and you all requested, and with all due respect to Mr. King, I'm not sure he's been involved with baseball stadiums and operations.
No, and actually, he makes it clear that we would be providing
Yeah,
the numbers. He would expect us to be coming up with the assumptions with which he would be tweaking the spreadsheet,
yeah, and so,
as I understand his
yeah, I
email.
think all of us are kind of, we can find out a little information here and there as we go along, but, if we're really going to get down to the nitty-gritty of a negotiation with a team, we need to have somebody on our side that knows all those facts and figures and has an idea of what's a good deal and what's not a good deal. And I'd also ask you all to keep in mind, we're talking about, getting revenue streams for the EDA and so forth, and all that's good and all, but keep in mind, if we're financing a baseball stadium, before you get a revenue stream, you're going to have to pay $2 to $3 million a year in bond costs. So, when you get a $500,000 revenue stream here or a $200,000 revenue stream there, that's still not adding up to the bond cost. So I just wanted to, make those.
Well, I agree with that, and that's why I think we need to take the position that, revenue sharing, and we need to make this a break-even proposition for the EDA and the county, and then whatever development occurs around the place is gravy. The objective is to meet those costs, and so that there is no liability.
Yeah, thank you. Then I would assume, our lawyer is well-versed in all of this.
Yeah,
So-
well, and like I said, the county attorney is talking to at least 2 or 3 different attorneys in this field about that, and,
Well, and I think that's where we need their expertise, because, we sit up here and we talk and we say, wow, what if we did gross revenue and we could really get at it? Well, it might turn out that that's not the best way to do it. And we need that guidance from people who have done it to let us know. That's why I think Ann summed it up nicely. What we're trying to do is get at the bottom line of what are we getting, or what are we trying to get, and then show that to them, and then they can guide us in that direction. And then also, taking things out off of our side of the ledger that are risky, such as maintenance. Because I don't know, maybe they come back and say, no, don't do that. You want to do maintenance for these reasons. But I think their guidance is necessary to make sure that this is a good deal.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, ma'am.
I know in some of our discussions when people have said, why doesn't the baseball team go ahead and spend the money and build it? And the answer was because they don't make enough money to cover the cost of the loan.
Mhm.
So I don't see in what we're doing here that we're going to come up with a revenue stream to cover the cost of bonds. It was also my understanding, based on the study that we had done by Davenport and Company, that the intent was looking at a special tax area, and that there would be enough revenue from the development around the stadium with a special tax district to pay the cost of the loans. So I've been kind of looking at the revenue sharing, not as offsetting the cost of the loans, but as providing additional revenue streams for the EDA. Now, some of it may go to that, or some of it may go to something else, or, but if we're sitting here trying to figure out how to get $2.5 million, we might as well just stop now, because.
Well, I think too, when you add all those things together, we're reducing the cost of the overall debt, and then it wasn't a special tax district. It was a TIF. That would take the baseline tax revenue that is generated, everything above that would go to paying the debt on the bonds. And then that way, what I'm looking at, truly and honestly, is to get the number down very manageably, that we're looking for $1 million, $1.5 million or so in outside revenue, spin-off revenue, so that we're not necessarily relying solely upon all the new generation of development to pay that entire bill. So if we get more money up front, it might offset that. Because then, remember, when it comes down to it, $2 million or so of a debt payment, if you have $500,000 here, $200,000 here, it adds up and it reduces that amount. We're moving on with the items for follow-up. I do think, Mr. Joyce, we do need the soft cost numbers so that when they come back and say, no, we're not doing these things, we can figure out where it is beneficial for the county to assume some of them. I think that we covered all of those. Did I miss anything?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
is there any way that we can figure out how to get the industries in our county to be able to provide things for the baseball stadium? For instance, I don't drink alcohol in any way, but maybe our local breweries provide alcohol for the stadium that they sell, and things of that nature. Is there any way that we could work that out?
To make sure that they hire local,
Yes.
local county entities. Yeah, I think that is something that we can, I don't think we can force them, but we can highly recommend it. And I think speaking of alcohol, we have some really nice places around here that could provide it.
Within the limits and regulations of the ABC, which is pretty restrictive, which means you've got to buy it from a distributor.
Okay.
And we can request from the distributor, but also I would very much like to see that. Maybe we could get a remote. But the real issue becomes too that as much as I would like to see that, if you're talking about the kinds of volumes we're talking about, I'm not sure we have very many wineries. I'm pretty sure we don't have any winery in the county that can meet that. And I don't know about breweries. But it is noble, and maybe we can figure out something where there could be a presence of a local brewery or winery at games.
Kind of the way I envision that would be a local brewery might get to make the Suns Hoppy Ale. So it'd be a private label for the Suns. And then by just consumer taste, you're going to need the other major brands that they consume. So
But there are things we can work on. And I would like to see, local perhaps shirt makers, local hat makers, local people like that. It's just when you get into alcohol, it becomes a tougher road to hoe.
That was the example that I was thinking of because you're sitting here. That's why. So,
And I should point out that Bruce in another lifetime was a
oh,
beer and
okay.
wine distributor, so.
If we lease space to one of the breweries and they make it on site, they're not subject to the distribution rules. You can sell beer from your own taps that if it's brewed on site without going through a distributor.
And again, if I may, just since we're on television, I by no means promote alcohol drinking or anything of that nature. It was just a thought that came to my mind.
Thank you, Pastor. Any other items that we're missing? I would assume then what we would do is move this along to the attorney when he or she is chosen, and then we would get a report back. So I would be very hesitant to discuss when our next meeting would be, unless we would want to set that, hoping that that could take place after this attorney, because I don't want us to spin our wheels at this committee.
Well, Mr. Chair, Mr. Cole, who did you use, I guess we're talking at having the attorney present at the meetings, right? Or were you talking about somebody
I
else?
don't know if we'll be physically present. I mean, we might be able to do a call-in, because whenever you're charging $500 an hour, if he has to
Exactly.
fly in from out of town, he's on the clock from the minute he leaves his office.
Agree.
So you burn up your 50 hours, and real quick that way.
Yeah.
So there may be a call-in or perhaps an intermediary from the EDA's attorney or the county attorney would kind of be a go-between for them to minimize the charges to the county on that.
I agree with you in having someone to represent, but I just want to make sure we weren't talking about the attorney because that would be prohibitive very quickly.
Yeah, and also, if you want, if the committee, Mr. Chairman, is willing, I mean, we could just hold in abeyance the setting of a meeting now, and I can, once we get the expert on board and do the initial handshaking and, hey, this is what we'd like you to do, then I can poll the committee again to see, as I did for the first meeting, when would be a good time for the next meeting. And we just, like I said, have to have at least 3 days' notice to advertise the meeting publicly before we can hold the meeting is all, so.
3 business days.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, 3
Correct.
business days.
I was sort of assuming, and again, that's a bad thing to do, I guess, that we would provide all this to the attorney, he would look at it, prepare some written or recommendations that he would send back, as opposed to actually having him present, and then if we had questions, then we could, send them, go back and forth. Maybe that's not a good way to handle it, but my experience with having somebody like on a conference call or something like that, it's very difficult and possibly even a waste of time and money, so. But I will defer to the attorneys on what they consider to be the best way to handle that.
Sure, Mr. Bengala will figure out the best way to communicate everything,
sure he
even
will.
by showing tonight's meeting or some parts of it to help convey what goes with words, the package of how you feel and the tone and that sort of thing.
Yeah, please don't have him watch it because that would be about $800 for him to watch this meeting, so.
I think, weren't,
Summarize it,
Right.
or
Okay.
have them watch excerpts of it. You can pull pieces out that.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
your list that you're working on would be a good starting point.
Right, well, that's why I was going over each point and hoping that,
Definitely in conjunction with, right.
right, absolutely.
Mr. Chair, before we go on to the next meeting, Mr. Joyce and I had made a recommendation about Mr. King. My question is, what do we tell him? Yes, no, maybe?
Well-
And maybe I'll defer to the EDA guys as well, because it's,
Well, if I might, and since the county is paying for expert analysis, I would not think that any committee member who wants to do anything with any citizen who has volunteered his time as generously as Mr. King has should be prohibited from doing that on their own and working alongside and bringing that information back to the committee, which I think would be helpful. Having the committee determine that this is the only avenue we're going to use.
I'm not
No, I'm not saying that you are. I'm just saying that I would like to leave that open, so if those discussions want to be had and all that information be brought back to the committee, I would encourage it, absolutely.
I might suggest that you ask him to possibly work on a generic model. And then, once we have some numbers we can plug in, that,
That's actually how I envisioned it, that the expert would give us a feel for the numbers
Okay.
that could then be plugged into the spreadsheet. Because
that's-
neither he nor any of us are in a position, other than what we've said we want in the contract, are in a position to say, this is the number that goes on that line.
Right.
That's all. But I would like to be able to tell Al, yeah, we thought it was a good idea.
Oh, no, I think
And
that it
we-
is a good idea.
We'd
and-
like very much for you to do it.
Absolutely.
Recognizing that, we'll have to get numbers for you for the most part, because he is not an expert on costs of stadiums. Okay. So,
Yes.
I can
Yes.
I can give him a copy of a real contract, the one for Sugarland, as an example. And he can work off of that and tweak from there.
July 31st, right? So we're going to have to move kind of fast. So once we get some word, I expect there will probably be email rather quickly to get a 3-day